Welcome to the Mindful Journalism Podcast, featuring conversations with journalists, scholars, and mindfulness practitioners for journalists and recovering newsaholics. You can learn more at 2xg.ca. Nanaba Duncan is the first Cardi Chair in Journalism, Diversity, and Inclusion Studies at Carleton University's School of Journalism and Communication, where she's reshaping journalism training to inspire empathetic and inclusive coverage, as well as equitable and ethical newsrooms. She teaches courses on journalism and belonging, podcasting, and the basics of reporting. Beyond academia, Nanaba serves as the executive director of Media Girlfriends, a podcast production company she co-founded with Garvia Bailey and Hannah Sung. And on top of that, she's the founder and director of the Mary Ann Shadd Carey Center for Journalism and Belonging, where she leads research focused on transforming journalism education and practice. Her work includes reporting in Black communities and the Black journalist and media worker experience. We talk about her path to journalism, the information gap on Black representation in Canadian news, and the importance of setting a clear intention in journalism work. She also discusses her research on Black journalists' experiences, and she shares some inclusive practices for journalists and media workers. Thank you for joining me. It's such an honor to be able to finally meet you because I've seen you on social media so much. And every time I see it, I'm like, yes!
I love that.
So yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining me.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
I wanted to start just basically starting with, how did you become a journalist? And now you're here, the associate professor at Carleton, and you started as a journalist.
Yeah. I started as a journalist when someone took a chance on me at CBC Radio. I had gotten my degree for about a year or so. I was not working or for about 5 years, actually. I didn't work in the industry. It was public relations and marketing and that kind of stuff. And then someone I knew who I had worked with at a newspaper where I was selling ads for the paper, maybe writing a couple, but I was doing more of selling ads for the paper. They needed a person on a show called Go with Brent Banbury, and they had this position that was called contest girl at the time. It was a very binary kind of position, and I was not contest girl, I was contest Nana at the time. I wasn't Nanaba, I was Nana at the time. I eventually forced everyone to say my name how my mother calls me, but back then it was Nana, and I never left after that position. I just had a lot of meetings and knocked on a lot of doors, pitched a lot of things, and eventually my career moved forward from there.
So you studied journalism.
I did. I got a master's in journalism at Western University.
And then you worked for like 5 years in PR, marketing, advertising, because you can't
Kinda,
find
yeah.
work.
Because I couldn't find work, yeah.
Yeah, as a journalist.
Yeah. The first thing that I did was, after school is I got this, it was like a scholarship from IDRC, what's that called? International Development and Research Center, I think that's what it was called. Anyway, IDRC at the time, they had their inaugural journalism scholarship. It was $20,000, and I got that. And you could go to a developing country of your choice. I went to Ghana, which is where I was born, and I worked with the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. So I was working in journalism for the very first year after I got my degree, and then I ended up working with Journalists for Human Rights as a country director for Ghana. And then my father died. And about 6 months into that job, I came back to Canada. And when I came back to Canada, it was just like, oh my gosh, any job, can I work somewhere?
Right.
I worked in PR. I worked at the makeup counter at the Bay down at Queen and Young for some time. I just had jobs. I was just working. And then the call from CBC came.
The call from CBC just came out of the blue.
No, it did not. It was most certainly not out of the blue. It was a person that I had already worked with at a different job who happened to now work at CBC. They were looking for a person to fill a certain position, and it was just like, it was one of these, it was Go was a fun game show kind of thing. And they needed a person, an extroverted person, to come in and get advice from some comedian. It was some kind of skit,
Mm-hmm.
but that opportunity meant that I had to walk into the building. When I got to the building, after that experience, I took the producer aside. David Carroll, if you're listening, thank you so much. I've thanked you already, but I'm thanking you again. And he was gracious enough to have a meeting with me. And he didn't have any kind of job or anything,
Mm-hmm.
but he later on remembered me when they needed someone for their show and asked me
Yeah.
if I wanted to. And I did. And after I auditioned, I got that part. It was like a part. I had to be on air. I asked a question on Go with Brent Banbury, and then I would mail people their Go bags, which was just like this swag. They just had to answer some ridiculous question on air.
Right.
And that was all I had to do. That was all I had to do. It was a 5-minute thing that I was on air doing. But I was like, y'all, you don't know what you all just did.
Yeah.
I am not believing. And I mean, I did eventually leave, but not after only after like 14, 15 years.
Wow. Holy moly. I know that with my other interviews with black journalists, it's starting to seem like a theme that they say someone gave them a chance. It took knowing somebody who said, "Oh, what about this person? I know who they
Mhm,
are." And I know this
mhm.
is kind of how things go, where people don't just get jobs, they get jobs if they know someone, right? They met someone, and then whoever is there around that table when hiring happens says, "Oh, I know that person. I think they're reliable and talented." And without, there's hundreds of other people maybe on that, just applying for that one job, who don't have someone that they know. And it seems like, I don't know, why am I only hearing this from people of color? I just, it makes me
Well, how
wonder.
many white people are you talking to? Let's talk about that.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question.
It's a numbers thing. We could talk about the statistics, but I think what you're
Yeah,
talking about still holds. Where, like in general, yes, in the industry, if you know people, we talk about it all the time. And it's not just
right.
Black people or people of color who talk about the industry in this way. If you know somebody, that's going to help you. But I do think that there is a different quality that there's a different aspect to it if you're a Black person, because the bar is higher for us in terms of where your talent is. I mean, you know what that is. You know what that's about, because I mean, your whole
Mm-hmm.
thing is called Twice as Good, right? So you understand that, wherever we get, it's like you got to show your worth in really big ways
Yeah.
in order for people to see what it is that you have to offer.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just always glad that people have seen what I have to offer. I mean, I can get really loud about it sometimes, but I would say that that's why my experience at CBC was, for the most part, brilliant. It was beautiful. I love the people at CBC.
What, at what point do you start to move from CBC to Media Girlfriends? What inspired that?
Media Girlfriends was inspired by my desire to show people that I knew how to interview.
Mm,
So essentially, I saw someone put their hand up for something at CBC, and I remember thinking, I want to put my hand up. But I knew that folks wouldn't just listen to me. I can't just say, oh, I want to do interviewing. You can't just say that. You have
right.
to be able to show it. And I was in the middle of my first parental leave, and I was having an existential moment where I literally was like, what the fuck am I doing with myself? Like, what am I doing? And I wanted to show I knew that I wanted to do some hosting, and I knew that I
Yeah.
needed to show folks that I could. So a podcast was the idea that came to me, and I knew that what would be the easiest thing that came up for me was that, I have connections with a lot of people who host, a lot of people who interview. So my thought was, why don't I interview those folks and they'll be able to tell me how I did. So I thought I would interview my media girlfriends. That was actually the original name of the podcast, My Media Girlfriends.
Oh.
And Hannah Sung, who is my, business partner at the moment now for Media Girlfriends, production company, she was like, "What if you just called it Media Girlfriends?" And I was like, "Oh my God, that's perfect." So that's what it ended up being. And so this is 2016. So I had been at CBC for a number of years.
Mhm.
And this was something that I was doing sort of on the side while I
Ah,
was working at CBC Music.
okay.
And it was just a little thing, just a little thing. And then I realized that because I was talking to not only women, but women of color, women who were mothers, not mothers, didn't ever want to be mothers, who were interested in politics, and folks who were queer as well. I cannot tell you, but my sense was that it was opening up a window into who we are as journalists, and that, there's this corner of the Canadian journalism world that, where they're they have different thoughts and
Mhm.
feelings, or maybe similar thoughts and feelings, but here they are, like, look at these folks.
I suppose that's the first time that you start carving out a space that's specifically for a certain group of people who work in media. Why did you feel like that was necessary?
I realized that it was necessary after the fact. I did not.
Oh.
Well, let me think on that. I don't know where I really got the idea that it had to be women in journalism, but I knew as a woman in journalism that my life was different from other people who experienced different bodies. Like, as a woman, there are things that you have to think about more than others. And
Mm-hmm.
by that, I mean getting paid the same as others, watching out for folks who are, the word is handsy,
Oh.
right? Presenting your ideas in a meeting in a way that gets you where you're heard and understood. And listen, these are not new problems.
Mm-hmm.
I'm aware that at CBC, even just being a woman and being taken seriously has been a problem for a long time. And CBC went through its own sort of changes years and years ago, I believe in the 80s, where some changes had to be made to recognize the worthiness of women.
Right. Yeah. And somehow, I mean, I guess it just goes to show what we mean when we say systemic, because it does continue to this day, and maybe it gets better and progress is made, but there is still a pay gap between men and women. And I mean, I've even written about, actually, it was a black owned news channel in the States that was underpaying its black women reporters. So the black men were getting good pay, but the women were not. So yeah, it persists.
Which outlet was that again?
I think it was just called Black News Channel, the BNC, and
Okay.
they closed down. I think they went bankrupt, and I'm not sure if it was one of the reasons why they closed down or if it was just generally part of the same shitstorm. Was that at the same time the women were launching a case against them for the pay
Oh,
gap.
wow.
Yeah. So it persists. And in Canada, we have reports on this now, luckily. I did some research on like the reporting of diversity statistics in newsrooms. And it's been an uphill battle since the 70s, starting in the States and continuing to this day in Canada and the United States, where newsrooms just don't want to give up their stats, right? They don't want to say, this is how many women we have. This is how many people who identify as black or as queer or as whatever.
Okay.
They don't want to give that up. And actually, they feel quite confident in refusing to give that up.
Yeah, it's true. And, my thought to that is that's silly. Like, this is silly. We all know that the numbers are bad. Let's just have the numbers so we can make it better. Like, we all
Yeah.
know it's going to be embarrassing. We all
Yeah.
know. It's
Yeah.
fine. It's fine. It's bad. Okay, great. It's bad. But how bad is it? And let's go and make those changes. Don't be embarrassed. Don't be
Yeah.
embarrassed that you're mostly white. It's fine. We know that's true. It's fine.
Yeah. We're
Don't
not
worry about it.
surprised. Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. And we need to know, better to know. That's one of the reasons why I was so inspired by your work and your research that you do today, actually, because there is a lack of statistics and a lack of studies even though you could, why couldn't you do that? It's just because there's an uncomfortability around talking about something that might
Mm,
reveal that there is systemic racism, which a lot of us have already accepted and agreed with, that there is such a thing as
mhm,
systemic racism.
mhm.
And your work really helps that problem, helps fill that gap. Like, can you tell me a little bit about your reasoning for all the research that you're doing?
Yeah, so the Canadian Association of Journalists has done a diversity survey for the past few years. I think they're in their 4th year now. And we can talk about, what they might be missing or what can be better, but I'm grateful that the surveys are being done. What I'm interested in is adding nuance to some of that research. So we don't have anything in this country that talks about the number of Black journalists, for example, or even how Black journalists feel or what their experiences have been or their mental health, the state of their mental health as they've been doing their jobs. That's actually what I'm extremely interested in. I'm
Mm-hmm.
extremely interested in it because of my own experience. So the research that I'm doing, I have 2 research projects going on right now. One is reporting in Black communities, which I'll discuss in a minute, and the other is the Black journalist and media worker experience. And that one is specifically, it is a survey in which I'm asking questions of Black journalists on how, why they got into journalism, what their experiences have been, whether or not they have experienced any discrimination, how things went down at their work
Mm-hmm.
while after George Floyd was murdered, for example. That's something I'm extremely interested in, and where they feel things are at now. And that what I find from that will feed into reporting in Black communities. And reporting in Black communities it is meant to be at the end, it will be a guide about how to report in and around Black communities
Mm-hmm.
in Canada. And it's going to be a free resource that will be available to all, and it is aimed at journalists and journalism educators. So essentially, that will be a website, a guide, and then some teaching modules and potentially workshops. I'm doing that work with Eternity Martis. This was her idea. She teaches a course called Reporting in Black Communities at Toronto Metropolitan University. And in this project, what we're trying to do is actually go to the stakeholders around reporting in Black communities. So, first, it is Black community members. So, we're going to Toronto, Halifax, Edmonton, and Montreal, and we want to talk to Black people about how they perceive the way that they've been presented in news media. And we're looking at anyone who is English or French and over 18 years old, and you have interest in the news or you follow the news in any way. And the kinds of questions that we're asking is, what is your relationship to the news? Do you trust journalists? Have you witnessed any stereotypes in journalism or in the news? What are those stereotypes? Do you believe that the news has an effect on your life? Does it influence the way that you access healthcare, for example? Do you think it influences how you relate to people out in the world or finding work? So those are the kinds of questions that we're asking, because if we can get those answers, then we may be able to come up with a guide that helps to mitigate the harms that have come to communities. We know that in the past, Black communities have spoken out about how they are presented in the news, and we want to change that.
Mm-hmm.
We also have seen how news outlets have badly presented Black people, and
Mm-hmm.
we want to change that. There are people in Canada who are not Black who are very interested in doing the work well. They're very interested. They want to change things just as much as we do. So we're going to talk to them. We're going to talk to non-Black journalists and find out what they need, find out maybe the mistakes that they've made, the things that they're embarrassed about, the things that they'd like to do. As well, we're going to talk to the newsroom leaders. What has happened in their editorial conversations that they wish they could change? What do they
Mm.
what is the biggest gap that they think that they have when it comes to Black people? If they don't know any Black people, how can we expect them to do their job well? What do
Yeah.
they now need to do, right? How can they support, and this is the big piece for me personally, how can they support Black community members who are working in their newsrooms? Something I always say is that in the course of my classes, I find when we have these conversations that we have to recognize that while individuals cannot speak for the whole, if I am Black and I'm the only Black person in your newsroom, and I tell you that there's something happening in my community, who is the expert?
Yeah.
Who's the expert? Is it you or is it me? Or if you don't want to call me an expert, who is knowledgeable
Mm. Yeah.
about the Black experience? It's me.
Yeah.
So listen to me, even if I'm young. Open your ears and listen to me. Doesn't mean that you don't ask questions about my pitch. Doesn't mean
Mhm.
that you don't, make it go through the same kind of rigor that you would of any story, but it does mean that you have to hear that it might be a story.
Right. Yeah. It seems like I have had this experience. Now, I have only ever worked in a mock newsroom when I was studying journalism because that was enough for me. But in my own experience, and so many other people that I've spoken to have had this experience of they say, oh, did you know this person is doing such and such in this community? Maybe it's a historically Black community. And the lead editor, whoever is in charge there, is like, I don't see how that's relevant. And it just drives
Yeah.
us insane because of, to who? To who do you
Mhm.
think it's not relevant? Right?
Yeah.
Because obviously I'm not bringing it to you because I think it's irrelevant. I'm bringing it to you because I think it's relevant. And no one has
Mhm.
asked me why I think it's relevant to the communities that care about that. It's just that's not relevant.
I'm so sorry that happened to you. My understanding is that's happening less and less, but it still happens, and we have to question. It makes us question who the audience is, who folks believe the audience is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna tell you a story. Like I had a really angry moment sometime after George Floyd was murdered, and I remember that I cannot tell you exactly when it happened, but I remember having this thought to myself, "Oh my God, whenever we think about the listener, at no point have I ever thought of my mother,
Mm-hmm.
and my mother is a listener. Why did I never think of my mother or my aunties who listen, as the listener was never anyone who looked like my parents or my family or Black people at all.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
never thought of the listener being Black, and
Yeah.
never. And at some point, I started to do it deliberately, like, it had to be conscious. It was
Mm-hmm.
intentional, and I think that's kind of where this mindfulness comes in, is, like, I had to be quite intentional about thinking that the listener might be someone who's not white.
Yeah.
I remember being so angry that just this system has taught me in a way that I just never considered myself.
Yeah.
It's so silly.
Yeah.
And no one actually said it. It's not like people said, "Oh, no, don't consider yourself."
No.
But that's the vibe.
Yeah, there are unspoken messages that you receive through your environment, of course, because you're also at the same time trying to survive in a certain kind of environment. And it's like nobody has time. I mean, you're always trying to fit your ideas in while someone has time. I think one of the problems with journalism is this 24/7 news cycle where like you have to write a story almost every day. So you don't get a
Mhm.
chance to slow down and think, I wonder who else might be reading this story. You don't, you're
Mhm.
just like, get it out now.
Yes, but if you teach yourself to, and as you are before you get into that position, for example, like with instructors or teachers, professors like me, my job is to, when you're actually doing the learning of how to do journalism, that you're thinking about that naturally. So that when
Right.
you get to the 24-hour, who is reading this and the circle of who it is, your audience is, that you're thinking of things inclusively in that moment naturally. That's or reflexively, I think is probably a better word. I just see
Mm,
that as my job,
mhm.
that's what I'm supposed to do, and folks who are already in the game, they're trying to learn that. They're trying to learn it. But I've had moments myself where you're just like, you need to make something, you need to do something very quickly, and inclusion is not high on that list. It is get it out.
Yeah.
That's what's on the list. It's get it out.
That's why I think the guidelines are going to be so hugely helpful. I mean, how amazing would that be for people to be able to pull up these guidelines, especially if they become like an industry standard where people can, one recommendation that I assume would be in it, and I don't know, but I would hope that there's something about, when it comes to community and extracting stories from communities, please show up again. And like if there's a
Mhm.
shooting in that community, show up when they have the fundraising cookout too.
Mhm.
Show up when they're honoring their young learners who got
Yeah.
scholarships or who traveled and started businesses and things like that.
I would go further to say, like, go now.
Yeah,
Like, what's happening there now? Don't wait for something. Don't wait for something bad that feeds into whatever idea that you have, which comes
right.
from something we've all taught. Like, we all watched the same stuff. The racism that you were taught, I was taught it too.
Mm-hmm.
So, just go now. Go and see what's up.
Yeah.
Go to the area that you think is quote unquote bad. Just go there.
Yeah.
I think that's something that I think is part of my job too, is to suggest it to the students who are learning,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I do believe there are
Just go.
certain processes or practices that, well, mindfulness does obviously come to mind. It's top of my mind. Mindfulness is at the top of my mind. But I believe that by doing certain practices that involve stopping, slowing down, contemplating, reconsidering that intention, what's my purpose,
Mhm.
there's actually step by step practices you can do to cultivate that mind that is curious and somewhat neutral. I'm not going to say objective
Yeah.
because I think that's a myth, but neutral, non judging.
Yeah. Absolutely, and you can add it to the things that you already do. So, for example, often in a pitch, you have to say, like, what is the story about? Why does this matter now? Who do you want to talk to? And we can also add questions like, who is this story for? And then add a question. Another question
Yes.
is, who might I be leaving out right now? It's a simple
Yes.
question.
Yep.
Who might I be leaving out? And then you look at that answer and then you say, how can I add that person back in? How can
Right.
I add that person in? And so it is a process thing. It's totally a process thing. I'm reminded of an activity and assignment that I do for my students, which is called the Journalism Manifesto. And it's a it's an activity in which they have to engage in intention. So first you are led to think about your place in this world, your positionality, um, what privileges you have and what you don't. So for example, with me, I might be led to think about how I have 2 degrees, I am non-disabled, and I'm also thinking about how I'm a Black person, not only a Black person, a Black woman. So I'm thinking about all these things. And then I'm led to, in this activity, I ask people to think about the kind of journalist they want to be. What kind of
Mm.
journalist do you want to be? What does that person look like? What adjectives would you just use to describe them? And then I ask people to write their journalism manifesto, a set of 5 to 7 sentences that will keep you grounded as you go forth in your career. So if I was when I was doing mine, I do, it'll be different every time you do it, but one of mine was that I will remain curious. I will remain curious is one of mine. Another one is that I will pause when I hear something from someone that doesn't fit my worldview. Pause.
Mm.
I will pause. I will pause. And pausing will make me listen to them. And like I can say all these things. Of course, it doesn't mean that I'm going to do it every time, but at least taking a moment at some time in your career to sit down and think about the kind of journalist you want to be. it can help you. It can help you with that intentionality for later on. At least
Yeah.
that's what I'm hoping.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
students said that they appreciate doing that
Oh,
activity.
I know I would have. Actually, I'm going to do it now. I'll just do it myself.
Yay! Yes. We can work together and do one for people. Absolutely.
One of my favorite sayings that I've picked up from social media is we don't have to be a perfectionist. We just have to be an improvinist. So you just get a little bit better every day. And what I like about the idea of like there are practices you can follow, like having a guidelines document, having things laid out, you can actually just improve every day. That doesn't mean that you do right every single time, that you do perfectly. It's not like you check this manifesto every day before you hit submit on an email or an article draft, and everything you do, you got to check the manifesto. It's not like that. It's that you're cultivating your mind. Your mind is a garden, and you're trying to cultivate the soil so that good things can grow, right? So you're trying to create the conditions where your mind
Mhm.
is able to remain curious, remain open, because
Yes.
people don't learn when they're pressed against a brick wall. It's just not going to happen. It's
Yeah.
just physically impossible, I think.
No, but if you had learned some things beforehand and you made it part of your breathing or part of your process, then it just happens naturally, even when you are pressed against the wall.
Yeah, that, and I think that I would call that the practice of reconnecting with your intention. The intentionality is that manifesto is a chance for you to reconnect with why are you doing this and how.
Mhm. Mhm. Or for some, connect for the first time.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything that you want to share so that I can direct listeners to learn more about you and your research?
Yes, I would like folks, Black people, to go to who live in either Halifax, Edmonton, or Montreal to go to reportingblack.com because we're coming to your city to do focus groups, and we really want to hear from you on your perception of how the news presents Black people.
Excellent. We're going to get the word out. And
Good.
what's your preferred platform if they want to follow you on social media?
Instagram, that's good.
And it's just at your name,
Nanaba
right?
Duncan.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nanaba Duncan.
I wish I could just talk to you forever because it feels like the longer we talk, the more I want to talk, but
I'm the
but
same.
yeah.
This is fun, and thank you for doing the work that you're doing. It does require all of us to do these little bits, and I am a big believer of, everybody should do the work, and you're doing your stuff over there in Halifax, and I'm doing my stuff over here in Toronto.
Yeah. And I
It's
I
great.
love when things overlap and align. Yeah, it takes everyone.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.